Figure it out.
Hello, this is Adam Koralik from Figured Out Productions. The following video is a video of some kind, and I hope you enjoy it. Hey everyone, welcome to the Figured Out cast for September 2022. I am your host, Adam Koralik, and this is going to be an interesting month. So as always, this is a Patreon-backed podcast. I appreciate your support. You can go into the description at any time if you're watching this on YouTube and just sign up for the Patreon, get access to it early, support the channel. You can pick subjects, you can get shout-outs, you can even be on the podcast. And normally at this point, I would introduce Abdullah because typically this is when we start with him. However, he's got the flu this month, so he's not going to be here. So our next backer, as you know, is Joseph Tamburino, who is going to basically fill in for him as well as himself. So let's all give a round of applause to Joseph for just kind of doing double duty here. Hi, Joseph.
Hi, Adam. Hey, Rob. Nice to be here.
Yeah, I was going to get to Rob eventually. Rob is actually back. It's been like forever. Rob keeps losing power magically the day we have to record.
I've actually been here the past few months. I just haven't said anything. So.
Oh, all right. I kind of remember you saying that like a half a year ago. So maybe it is true. Maybe there's something to this.
Yeah, some months I just don't talk.
Okay, that makes sense. But yeah, so we're just going to kick it off here. Now, as always, if you want to skip around in the time code, I've put it down there for different subjects. Feel free. We're totally okay with that. The first one up, though, we're going to kind of do in place of Abdullah since he couldn't represent himself. And there's another guy who picks a subject. His name is Spencer Peryear. He did not get back to me this month, so we're going to just kind of combine all this into one thing. And Rob actually selected it. You wanted to talk about the Magnavox Odyssey anniversary, so go for it, my friend.
So I think you're underestimating it a little bit. So it's not just the Magnavox Odyssey anniversary this month, September 2022. This is the anniversary of video games. This is 50 years of home console video games, because in 1972, in September of that year, we don't have the exact date, so it's kind of appropriate that we're doing it just in the general September podcast. September 1972, Magnavox releases the very first home video game console, before Pong, before the Atari, before the Fairchild, everything. It's the original Magnavox Odyssey. Home console was created by Ralph Baer, who's generally regarded as the godfather of the creator of video games, because he created the Magnavox Odyssey and its predecessor, the Brown Box. So yeah, I mean, this channel has always been like really had a fondness and appreciation for video game history, and I thought it was important, since Adam's certainly not going to do a first-gen video game recap, ever.
Eventually. It's
ever.
On my list. It's on my list.
Ever.
It's on my list. It's on the list.
So, I mean, I donated that Magnavox Odyssey to you, like 5 years ago now?
It's still sitting there. I have not touched it. It's like 20 feet away from me in the box right over there. Trust me, it's fine. I got you.
So, yeah, I mean, this is, it's kind of a really interesting time. Like, I'm all about 5s and 0s for anniversaries, and this is a pretty significant one. It's not something that we think about a lot, this first video game generation, which is really, as you like to say, Pong clones and the Magnavox Odyssey. That's really all the first video game generation is. But it is still a video game generation. There's the first ever video game console war is in that generation, which is the battle between Pong and the million Pong clones and Magnavox in their Odyssey line. There was lawsuits and everything that started because of this. So yeah, it's really, I think it's something that needed to be mentioned, that the thing that brought us all here, video games, and console video games specifically, is 50 years old. So, pretty cool.
That is pretty cool. And honestly, until now, I did not realize that the Odyssey predated the Pong consoles. That seems backwards.
So the history of this thing, right? starts with a guy named Ralph Baer, who was an inventor of many things. Really incredible person. Actually went on to create the electronic game Simon after the Odyssey as well. So really cool guy. In the 60s, he created something called the Brown Box. It's not even called a video game. This is before video games were named video games. And he referred to it as the electronic game of the future. And he kind of shopped it around and brought it to different expos and conventions, things like that, for coin-op machines, and showed it off. Look at this, my new invention, trying to shop it to different companies to get a production model out of it. And actually, during one of those showings of the Brown Box, a fellow by the name of Nolan Bushnell comes and sees a demonstration of the Brown Box. And the Brown Box basically played Pong, what he referred to as, like, electronic tennis. And by this time, Atari was not really a thing yet. I believe it was called Nutting Associates. And they created the first arcade game, which was called Computer Space. Adam and I actually saw a very rare Computer Space cabinet at the National Video Game Museum back in November. But in
November, it was almost a year ago. Dude, by the time this is out publicly, back in November will have been 11 months ago.
Yeah, I know. So yeah, the Computer Space is not a success, and he sees this tennis game demonstrated, and he's like, wow, that's a really good thing. I should monetize this, because that's what Nolan Bushnell does. He's always thinking about the bottom line. So he goes to the very first Atari employee, because there's Nolan Bushnell, there's Ted Dabney, and then there is their first ever employee is a guy named Alan Alcorn. And they're like, hey, make a tennis game for, as your training to be part of this new company, Atari. And he gives them the prototype, and he says, this is perfect. Let's put it out. And that's how Pong gets created. But this is before Pong, the Magnavox Odyssey, because Pong came out in November of 1972. So this the Odyssey beat it by 2 months. So it is the first ever home video game console. And it's going to be the only one for a very long time until the Fairchild Channel F in 1976 that uses interchangeable cartridges. So very, very revolutionary console.
Yeah, which is why I said it seems kind of backwards that the Odyssey would come out before all the Pong stuff. I mean, granted, the Odyssey didn't actually have their cartridges weren't like how the Fairchild Channel F was, where there was actually games on it, but it would determine which game would be played.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
Odyssey still had multiple games.
Yeah,
and the Pong clone is Pong.
The games are determined by the accessories, the overlays. It's kind of a half tabletop board game console and half video game console. It's a very odd thing to actually see one and kind of play around with it. But it's interesting. It just honestly wasn't marketed well, and that's one thing that Atari and Nolan Bushnell and Ted Dabney did really well, was they were able to slap a name on it and market it first as an arcade machine and then as a home console. So yeah, that's kind of the kind of amazing story of really the birth of video games.
Referring to the Odyssey, because it is funny. It is. I mean, you keep hounding me about the first gen recap, and the funny thing is, and I've told you in the past, the Odyssey is the only console in that generation even worth talking about. It's because of exactly what Joseph was saying. Everything else is like a Pong clone. And there's a million of them. So one day, I promise you, Rob, you will see in your news feed, first gen recap Magnavox Odyssey and first gen recap everything else.
Everything else.
It'll just be like every Pong clone console that I've got, which is admittedly I've got more than I should. I think I have 4 or 5 of them, and I have some of the more interesting ones, like one made by Atari, one made by Radio Shack, one
you got the
made
Nintendo
by...
one, right?
I do. I was about to say that one of the ones made by Nintendo, because I think TV Game 6 or whatever it is.
Yeah.
There's 2 of them. I have one of them.
I would just go on record and say that the Mattel Hyperscan got a video game generation recap video before the Magnavox Odyssey did, and
that's because it was filling a gap in a series that already existed. Whereas this, you have to plan around it. And to be honest with you, it's kind of good that I haven't done it yet, just because I have, over the years, accumulated a few additional Pong clones, so they'll make for better video fodder when I get around to it. As recently as last year, I got a new one. So, yeah. Speaking of, like, the weirdness of the fact that it's, like, 50 years old and anniversaries, I actually noticed something... So I don't know if anybody remembers this, but over a year ago, I noticed, and I made a tweet about it, that the gap between the launch of the Super Famicom and the 360 was now less time than the gap between the 360 and today, and that was over a year ago. So when I noticed that, I decided to see what other anniversaries and things were coming up, which was kind of awkward because nobody really calculates those, like the distance between 2 events. And so I noticed one that was coming up was the launch of the Atari 2600 was 8,211 days until the launch of the PlayStation 2. So you could just find what day was going to, be the launch of PS2 to today. And that was August 26th this year. So only like at the time most people are hearing this like a month ago. And so, yeah, the gap between now and the PS2 is a longer amount of time than the Atari 2600 and the PlayStation 2 if you want to feel really old. But what's cool about that, when I tweeted about it, that tweet got a lot of traction. Even Atari themselves was like, oh, we didn't know that. Like, that was kind of interesting. They commented on it. But yeah, it's September is always going to be a weird time for video game anniversaries because a lot of stuff launches in September historically. September and November, those are the 2 big ones.
I mean, what important video game console that any of us should give a shit about launched in September? Like, no company in their right mind, if they wanted their video game console to be successful and loved and appreciated, would ever launch a video game console in September. You would have to be an absolute fucking lunatic to do that.
I mean, I get where you're going with it, but we're not talking about the Dreamcast just yet. Yeah, fun fact, the PS1 also launched in September 9th, same day as the Dreamcast, just a few years earlier.
See, just failure after failure.
Yeah, stuff nobody likes. And when was the Loopy launched? That's what I care about.
It's on April Fool's Day, probably.
April 1st. You know what's funny is I used to know the answer to that, but the Loopy has become such a meme within like my Discord and stuff. I've kind of ironically forgot most of the real details.
October 19th.
Oh, they just missed it. No, that's why it flopped. If it had come out in September, we'd all be like having loopies. Yeah. Loopy parties would be great. Okay, so do you have anything else to say about Magnavox Odyssey?
That's about it. Happy birthday, Odyssey. Happy birthday, video games.
All right. Thank you to both Abdullah and Spencer for that, even though neither of them knew that was going to happen. We'll move on. Joseph, now you got to, of course, pick a subject, and thank you again for really coming out here and doing the heavy hitting. What you wanted to talk about was the increasing price of the PlayStation 5, what we think it could potentially mean for the current console generation. Do you want to lead it off, or do you want us to go straight into it with what we think?
You could start going into it with what you think, to start with.
Okay, so... This is going to get complicated because the easy thing to do is be like, oh, Sony, you're so greedy. I don't want to have to pay you more money for a thing. That's unfair. That's usually the customer position and I'm not going to sit here and defend Sony. I'm just going to try and explain their mentality. This is hard to discuss without kind of sort of talking about politics, and I don't want to do that. So I will very much narrow this down by saying... We live in an era called globalization. It has existed since the end of the Second World War. It was basically a deal the United States made with most of the world that rather than have a bunch of empires fight each other, we would all just kind of agree to a certain set of rules, mostly enforced by the United States Navy. That's just the truth of it. It was a thing against the Soviet Union. That's what we were doing. However, that world is coming to an end due to certain recent world events and the fact that the U.S. no longer really cares to police the world, as it were. So the result of that is a lot of the supply chain systems are breaking down. COVID sent it into overdrive. That's where we are now. This is why less and less manufacturing is happening in China, in addition to all their lockdowns they've got going on. Supply things are breaking down. This is causing direct effects on delays of products and why it's getting increasingly expensive to actually produce things, because we're starting to have to relocate labor to other countries. Usually Vietnam, the United States itself, and Mexico are going to be the big winners of new labor forces. But setting up that process is taking a while simultaneously having to shut down the Chinese system is painful. What does this have to do with anything? Guess where your PS5 is made. It's right dead smack in the middle of that. And so that's where the increased costs come from, because Sony has to deal with this. Now, to talk very specifically on the issue of the PlayStation 5 itself, when they talked about the price raise, it was basically a $50 average across the world. The obvious
10% raise, basically.
Okay, so the obvious exception to that list was the United States, where it wasn't officially raised, but we'll get back to that. So like every other country is going to have to deal with it, and it just kind of looks like the Americans are exceptional or special or whatever, and they don't have to deal with it, which is not true, by the way. Basically, in the case of the U.S., they knew we would complain about it more, and we wouldn't put up with it. So what they did instead is Sony kind of used a backdoor trick to achieve the same goal. You guys might remember they put out the Horizon bundle for the PS5, which happens to be $50 more. It's also the only version of the PS5 that they sell anymore. They don't make the regular one anymore. So they did give you that. They just kind of threw in a key and said, fine, we'll give away a digital copy of this one game to satisfy them, to make them think they're getting a bargain, but really we haven't changed anything. So what's interesting about this is people are also pointing out, Microsoft isn't really doing this. And as Rob and I have talked about many times, Microsoft doesn't care. They don't have to care if you buy their hardware or not. That's not their model. They just kind of sell it to you as a way to give you Game Pass. Now, I think it's Samsung TVs are now shipping out of the box with Game Pass on it. You can play it there. You don't even need an Xbox console anymore if you don't want it. So that and Microsoft essentially has like infinite cash to weather any sort of storm. Hence, while the supply chain issues do apply to them in a hardware standpoint, from a financial standpoint, they can eat it and they don't really have to care. But again, they've also been future-proofing by saying, we're just going to integrate our software into other people's hardware problems. We don't have to deal with it directly. Hence, this is less Microsoft's problem and more Sony's problem. What I would say long-term is you'll probably have an easier time getting Xbox hardware if you want it. It will also be cheaper, but it's probably very temporary. The PS5, I don't know, man. I mean, this is really going down the road, but this might be one of those things that we might be seeing like the end of the PlayStation model as we know it, where they have a more physical media based console where they focus on their own IPs and they try to treat it like a more traditional game model instead of Xbox, which is like our hardware does not matter to us. We will see. And I mean, if you have to deal with all this like relocation of production, Microsoft's in a great position to deal with that, and Sony is not.
Yeah, I mean, so first of all, absolutely agree 100% with what you said. Like the reasoning of Sony doing this price hike it's absolutely reasonable and understandable considering the global economy. That said, oh damn, that's not good for them. It's not a good thing. Basically, the almost universal reaction online towards this has been, so not only can I not find your fucking console without paying a scalper, but now I can't, now you're forcing me to pay extra for something that I can't find. Like, so the scalping price is going to go up too. So this whole video game generation, Xbox Series X and PS5, is really just this. It would have made so much more sense for them to delay these consoles.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too.
I mean, you look at the 7th gen, right? Your Xbox 360, PS3, and Wii. That console generation was really, I mean, what I would refer to as like artificially extended out of necessity because of the financial crisis that started in 2008, 2009. Adam, you've always said that had that not happened, we probably would have gotten new consoles around 2011, 2012 for
that would
Xbox.
Yeah, I mean, we did technically from Nintendo, but that was for different reasons. But
yes. Nintendo's, they're off in their own thing. But for the big two, Sony and Microsoft, they recognized, okay, this is not a good time to launch a console. It's going to tax the consumers at a time where they don't want to be taxed or cannot be taxed, but also it's going to make us look bad and say it's like, wow, is like the late era PS3 games so much more better than so much more worse than the early era PS4 games? Like, I don't think they saw that big difference in the gameplay and graphics and everything. So they held off, and I thought that was a really smart move. Why they didn't look at COVID and see and just do any sort of projections and see, hey, listen, this isn't going away, and this is going to lead to supply chain issues. This is going to lead to a whole other host of issues which we cannot, really predict right now. The best thing that we could do would be to pump the brakes on it and manufacture as much stock as we can and delay the system's launch by at least a year. Because one, the games, at least on Xbox, at launch, there was no distinction between Xbox One games and Xbox Series games. They were the exact same games, just with different builds, downloaded via patches. And in Sony's case, a lot of those games, like Miles Morales or Assassin's Creed Valhalla, were also available on the previous gen as well. And even now, 2 years later, it's like I have maybe 8 PS5 games, and I kind of struggled to find those. Like, there's nothing to play on your fucking console right now. So not only can people not find it, you're going to raise the price on it for the people that can find it, and there's nothing to play on your fucking console right now. So why
nothing that you need the PS5 for specifically?
Nothing that you need the PS. It's like, listen,
there's Returnal, there's Ratchet and Clank.
Yeah, I loved the new Ratchet and Clank game. It was great, but it's like, is that a system seller? No, it's not. So it looks extremely bad to consumers for Sony, and if I was Microsoft, man, I would capitalize on this as big as you can. And, like, this might sound counterproductive to this, because right now you can actually find Xbox consoles in stores. I was at a Best Buy last week, and I actually saw one for sale. The Series X, not even the Series S. Yeah, so you can find them. I'm curious. Adam, you want to, like, go on to Best Buy right now and see if you could buy one?
I'll take a look.
Yeah, just to see. So they are far more available than the PS5 already. So now, if I was Phil Spencer and I was at Microsoft, I would say, you know what? Slash the console price by $50.
It's not available on their website. However, it does say that check stores things, which means there's a very good chance a store somewhere around you will have it.
Yeah,
yes.
I have unavailable nearby, but I have add to cart.
Oh yeah, now I have add to cart. It just updated, so I guess I could buy it on their website right now if I wanted to.
So you see, you can find Xbox consoles in
stores.
Yep,
I could have it. According to this, I could have it within 5 days shipped to me. I don't know why it would take 5 days, but yeah. I could buy it right now.
So you can get an Xbox right now.
Yes, on their website.
Near me, and I need to actually pick it up, but whatever. I have one already, so it doesn't matter.
In my case, it says they would, but I also live in downtown Chicago, so
that is true.
So one, you can find an Xbox. Two, Game Pass is doing a lot of really cool things. They're picking up extra third-party developers, like with the Activision Blizzard thing, which isn't quite completed yet, but it's almost assuredly is going to happen. And all these things, Xbox, they need something to really galvanize video gamers towards their brand. So if I was Phil Spencer, if I saw Sony raising a price and getting this much flack for it online, you drop the price of your system. Because look at, if you want a historical example of how this is done, look at what Sega did when... I can't remember. Who's the guy that came in and, Sega of America president, that came
Bernie
in?
Stoller?
I'm sorry, both of you.
Which era are you talking about?
The guy who came in for the Genesis.
Tom Kalinske?
So, Tom Kalinske, right? So, he comes into Sega, and the Genesis is not doing well. It's being outsold by the NES at this point. And he goes to Nintendo Japan, goes to Sega Japan, and says, if you want me to sell the Sega Genesis, you're going to need to do three things. One, you're going to need to target all of your marketing towards being anti-Nintendo. You need to make aggressive marketing campaigns against your competitor. Two, you need to bundle in your brand new hot IP with the console, Sonic the Hedgehog. Three, you need to drop the price of the console. And that's the pill that Sega had to do. They had to swallow that pill in order to compete with Nintendo. And that was the one generation that they did compete with Nintendo. They basically had effectively a 50% share, give or take.
Let's also keep it real. That was the one time Sega Japan actually listened to Sega of America.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
Usually the way it worked was Sega of Japan told Sega of America how to present their own platform in their own country and without understanding the market. I've always, this is a side tangent, but I've always said one of the things that makes for the best consoles and the best gaming experiences is when the company producing them is desperate. Yeah. Because when they're desperate, they actually do the right things. When they're not, that's how you get the PS3 launch. That's how you get the Xbox One launch. When they're not desperate, they do stupid things.
So that's what I would do as Xbox. You have to capitalize on this. People want to get into this next generation of console gaming. Like it or not, having games to play or not, people want in. There are people still looking for PS5s and still looking for Xboxes to an extent. So capitalize on that. Say, oh, you can't get a PS5? Why don't you walk into a Best Buy right now and you can get an Xbox Series X, which is more powerful than the PS5, has Game Pass, and is going to be home to all of your favorite Activision Blizzard games going forward. And it's going to be $100 cheaper.
Yeah, or if they, for whatever reason, can't drop the price of the Series X for whatever reason, be like, hey, if you were looking for something to game on, go to Best Buy, and if you need a new computer, go buy a new computer that could actually play games. Oh, and we'll throw in Game Pass.
Yeah, but to that point, that's the difference between Sony and Microsoft. Sony cannot afford to not raise the price of the PS5. They need to. The PlayStation division is the only part of Sony that's making money anymore.
Is that still true? I know that was huge 10 years ago, but I don't know if that's still. But then again, I think about it, I'm like, maybe their film division because they had a huge hit with Spider-Man. But outside of that, I mean,
but it's Sony, it's PlayStation now.
I know that. But I'm just wondering if that
the film, all their other films are not doing well. So it's like Spider-Man can't. I mean, maybe it can. It is Spider-Man, but how are they going to put an actual Spider-Man out?
I agree with you, but that I know, but that last one generated like $2 billion. It's like one of the highest grossing movies of all time. So I think they're okay in that department. At least maybe Spider-Man alone is carrying the film division. I don't really know. I'm just saying, I don't know if technically that statement is true anymore, but it probably still basically is.
But I mean, you have to look at the proof in the pudding, right? So this price increase, can you guys think of another instance of this ever happening in video game history?
Yes, I can think of another time this happened. Sony did exactly this with the PS4. Don't you remember?
No, I don't.
Okay, they did. They raised the price by $50 in Canada, €50 across mainland Europe, and £50 in the UK about a year and a half into the launch of the PS4. The only country they didn't do that with was the US, where they once again just bundled it with a game. This is not the first time Sony has done this.
I honestly completely forgot about that.
But you do remember it now that I said it.
Kinda, yeah.
Yeah, see, this is not the first time Sony has ever done this. But this time...
That actually...
This actually is different this time. I give them a little bit more of a pass this time, only because I understand it's proving almost impossible to build these things. And the same problem applies to Microsoft. They're just willing to eat it because they can. And as Rob said, Sony can't. They don't have a choice. PS4 was more egregious because they were desperate and they're like, hey, we have a revenue winner. Let's just steal some extra money. That was essentially the difference.
But the also difference is you could find a PS4 in stores back then, and you can't find a PS5.
Yeah, that's. I'll give you that. That's different too. That's why the PS4 examples.
Far more.
The PS4. That's why the PS4 example was more offensive, because you could find it, and they still raised the retail $50 in most countries.
I disagree. I think this is far more egregious.
Really?
Yes, because because of consumer loyalty and trust and desire to invest in your brand. People want PS5s. They can't get PS5s. And now, on top of not being able to find one or having any fucking games to play on it, now you're going to increase the price when we're all fucking hurting, when price of everything is going up. Like, you can't find solace in a video game anymore. That escapist fantasy does not exist for a lot of people that want to get PS5s.
And while I agree with you that it sucks, you said it yourself, the price of everything is going up, and it's all going up for the same reason. The breakdown of globalization. You can't put Sony in just blaming them specifically for this when it applies to everything. That's why I think the PS4 example was worse, because they chose to do that on their own. This was like they didn't have much of a choice. Now, again, it sucks. I agree with you. But I at least understand this one from a chain perspective of like how we got to this point. The other one was simple as like, hey, we need money and the PS4 is actually selling. Just raise it $50 and we'll make more money. I kind of get why they're doing it. It still sucks to be told, yes, as a customer, hey, you can't find this thing, and if you ever do, it's now going to cost you more than it did, and everything around you costs more. I know that sucks. I completely agree with you on that. But at least, like, if that applies to Sony, we have to paint everybody with that brush, because everybody's having to do it for the exact same reason.
But where is this everybody in the video game industry?
What does that mean? You just said...
Where's Nintendo's price hike? Where's Microsoft's price hike?
Well, Microsoft, as we just said, Microsoft doesn't have to deal with this. I mean, they do, but they don't have to pass it on to us for different reasons. Nintendo has already had this console out for 5 years, almost 6. The hardware has gotten a lot cheaper to produce. They've also produced a mass amount of them before the end of globalization. So they have stockpiles. And as Joseph just said, they've already been mass producing the OLED. Sony's in a different boat. And I feel for them on this. As much as I hate being the guy who's like defending a major corporation on something, I see how they got into this position. And I feel for them only because it looks really, really bad. And it is really, really bad. But I at least see how they got there. And they're not alone in this. Like, this does seem to apply to everybody, including, computer manufacturers. Everybody who builds anything that was previously built in China is going to have a very hard time for the next 5 years. That's just how it's going to be. Like, the reality is you're going to see a lot more production move to the United States, Mexico, and Vietnam. Those are your 3 big production winners. And that process will take a lot of time because you have to build facilities for those workers to actually start doing stuff.
And then
unfortunately,
even once they're there, stuff is going to cost more because in the U.S. at least, you have to pay the people who are building your stuff more.
Yes, but that's not as true as it used to be. The reason Chinese labor was so cheap is because they were doing it for like 1/15 the price of an American worker. Now they're doing it for half the price. So stuff was going up, but then you also have to factor in shipping costs, which now no longer matters because the supply chain will be domestic. So you actually save that back. It will end up being cheaper to produce stuff in the U.S.
So
that's good enough.
So just one last thing. Listen, don't get any mistake. I totally agree with you. I understand the concept of the supply chain issues in inflation. As I mentioned, I totally get it. I understand. And I'm not, like, make no mistake, I'm not a socialist or anything like this that's going to, like, just endlessly crap on corporations because they're making money. But the interesting thing is, all I'll say is, Nintendo is being able to weather this storm because they're using older hardware components and they built up a stock. Microsoft is able to weather this price increase because they have infinite cash flow. I will be curious to see, have somebody listen into Sony's end of the fiscal year financial report. And if they say, oh, look at this, like our projections are right on this, and we've increased our revenue streams by this much, and do this, and basically tout how much richer they got. Because if they do that, and if they don't say, listen, we needed to course correct based on the global economic situation and all that, that's one thing. But let's see what they say about their revenue. If they say that their revenue increases and they're making more money, that's a bad look. I could definitely see some people shining a light on that because of the negative reaction to this. And say, like, look at this. They didn't need to do this. They could have eaten that cost like Microsoft does.
Sure.
Or Nintendo does. But they chose not to.
Because Nintendo's not eating the cost. They're just working on much lower hardware and already had the supply line set. But
let me throw you a bone here, Rob. I will always bet on Jim Ryan to do the wrong thing. He is the CEO of PlayStation currently. I assume you guys saw his comments about Call of Duty, right?
Yes.
Okay, so for those who missed it, of course, Microsoft is basically in the final stages of acquiring Activision, which means Call of Duty will essentially be theirs. Now, Sony naturally did not like this. They wanted access to Call of Duty, but they don't technically have a right to it for any reason. So Microsoft, essentially, Phil Spencer specifically, came out and basically offered them like 3 additional years of it just as a goodwill gesture. And Jim Ryan basically, and that was privately. Jim Ryan went public and said, like, essentially, like, this deal isn't good enough. We're only going to have it for 3 years. So in essence, he told the public, hey, if you like Call of Duty, PlayStation is not for you because it's not going to be here much longer. Thus, essentially, it was kind of a Bernie Stoller Saturn is not our future moment. Where he essentially told the audience that the core thing they probably like PlayStation for will not be there for very long. And thus, maybe it's not the best idea to invest in a PS5, which is apparently not that hard to do since you can't find it and it's more expensive than it used to be, where Xboxes are cheaper, readily available, and will have that game. And that franchise. So, I mean, if I was Phil Spencer, I'd be like, wow, I really went to this guy, tried to do him a favor, under the table. I was like, we don't have to do anything, but we'll give you 3 years of this. Then you went public telling everyone not to buy your own hardware. Thanks, dude.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure Phil Spencer didn't do that just out of, like, the goodness of his heart. He wants to at least make sure that Sony stays enough of a competitor that people don't look at him and be like, "Well, you have a monopoly on video games," despite the fact that they basically have a monopoly on video games, other than PlayStation. Once they get Activision Blizzard, but that's besides the point. They don't want to be the only people making consoles in town, because then their game division will get broken up or whatever. But that's going more into politics, and let's not do that.
Imagine we reach a point where Microsoft has to keep propping up Sony just to stay in video games. Like, that's like how it's starting to feel. Like, where, Phil Spencer's like contacting Jim Ryan. He's like, "Hey man, maybe don't say that. Maybe here, tell you what, we'll give you what's another franchise? We'll just let you have that. Like, come on, man, you got to stay in the game. We need to pretend like we're really fighting."
Did you catch his advice to Sony with their PlayStation Plus thing? It's like, hey, you know what? Maybe it would be a better idea for PlayStation Plus, to add more day one, first party titles like we do on Game Pass, like giving them unsolicited advice. Just like, come on, man,
I didn't even see that.
Yeah.
I wasn't completely serious with what I was saying, but now that you said that, hell, maybe they are. But
who knows?
Doesn't really speak well for how this generation is going to be.
Oh no, this generation has shit the bed. Pretty fucking badly.
As I was saying earlier, as far as PlayStation 5 exclusive stuff that you can't play anywhere else, there's like I said, there was Ratchet and Clank, Astro's Playroom, Returnal. I mean, there's other stuff coming out, but most of what came out for Sony also came out on PS4. Deathloop didn't, but that also came out on PC.
Yeah, it's going
the Demon's Souls remake didn't, but it was it's a remake. It's a remake of a PS3 game that basically just looks prettier.
Did you see Angry Joe's review of it?
No.
Oh my god! So he did a review of The Last of Us years ago. So his review of The Last of Us Part 1 was that you have footage of him. He's on his computer. He takes The Last of Us and he puts it into an upscaler thing and just re-uploads his original review. That's the review he did of the re-release.
Yeah, The Last of Us, same deal as with Demon's Souls. The game is basically the same. It just looks prettier. Well, and The Last of Us has all the accessibility features of Last of Us 2, but neither of those games really needed to be remade.
Yeah, that's indicative of my problem with the modern AAA video game industry, which is also the same problem I have with the motion picture industry. There are now 5 AAA games a year and 5 AAA blockbuster movies a year, and they're all either fucking remakes or from a franchise, sequels, or they're it's just the same stuff over and over. And then you have the very tip of the mountain, and then you have indie games. There's no AA games anymore. That's look at the size of physical libraries from the Xbox 360 to the Xbox One. And I'm specifically using the Xbox One because it doesn't really have a focus on limited release indie games like the PS4 does. But look at the software library. The Xbox 360 has tons of games. It's got I'm still discovering weird shit on that console, that I've never heard of before. It's not the same with the Xbox One. There's just not AA games anymore.
Yeah. And obviously even worse for the Series X and PS5.
Yeah.
But
yes. On that note, stick around for our discussion of Thor: Love and Thunder later.
That'll be much later. But speaking of which, we should move on from this because we still have a lot to do. So thank you, Joseph, for that subject. So now what we're going to do is a round of shout-outs here. Now, every one of these people are Patreon backers. They're awesome people, and they're at the level in which they get a shout-out. You, yourself, listening, can be on this at any time. We got Luis Bonilla, Loke, Michael Kelly, Tim Inman, and Trey Wagner. Once again, that's Luis Bonilla, Loke, Michael Kelly, Tim Inman, Trey Wagner. Thank you guys so much. You make this all very possible. We very very appreciated. And again, if you want to sign up on Patreon anytime to get early access to this, or get a shout out, pick a subject, or even be on the podcast potentially, all of that is on the Patreon. And you also get access to all the other videos as well. So we'll move on to the next subject here, which came to us from Chuck Shaw. He's the guy who runs Mo GameCon. Awesome guy. He had kind of an interesting one that I can't believe, Rob, quite frankly, that we never really thought of before, because it's such a basic subject that you would think we would have chatted about at some point. And his basic pitch was, what are your favorite quote-unquote inferior sequels, or your favorite game that had a terrible sequel? Basically, if you have like a favorite game ever and then they made a sequel to it where you're just like, how is this the follow-up to that? You can name that, or you can name like a sequel that you really liked that everybody thought was bizarre because it wasn't anything like the original. So the most infamous example would be The Legend of Zelda 2: Link's Awakening.
Adventure of Link.
Sorry, the second one, the one on NES.
Adventure of Link.
That's Adventure of Link. Link's Awakening.
Okay, Adventure of Link. Oh, right. Sorry. You're right. The Zelda 2, whatever. Zelda 2 is infamously absolutely nothing like the first game, and it's not really anything like any other Zelda game. And so a lot of people don't like it because it feels like an oddity. But then again, there's a lot of people who are like, well, I kind of like the fact that it's an oddity. So do you guys have anything off the top of your head? Do you need a minute to think about it?
Yeah, I definitely need a minute to think about it.
All right, I'll talk about some of mine while you think about it then. Unless, Rob, it sounds like you have something.
Yeah, so the one that came to mind for the latter choice, the sequel that is nothing like the original, that I actually like better than the original. And this is kind of controversial, but I do see some love for this game every once in a while. And that is a Genesis game called Toe Jam and Earl Panic on Funkotron, which is the sequel to, of course, the original Toe Jam and Earl. The first one is kind of like an isometric, procedurally generated game, I believe. Kind of like exploration-based. Interesting game, but I never really cared for it. Ironically, I had no idea that game existed, because when I was a kid and I had a Genesis, I picked up Toe Jam and Earl 2, which is Panic on Funkotron. Instead of an isometric procedural generation game, it is a 2D, standard 2D platformer. But the graphics are fantastic, like big, colorful sprites. The music's really fun. It's like a really kind of gross out humor, weird aesthetic, and people talk about the original one like it's a masterpiece. For the Genesis, I never really cared for it. I much prefer the basic bitch platformer sequel.
I vastly prefer platformers over isometric type of things, so I'm actually totally with you on that one. You know, it's funny, the Toe Jam and Earl account follows me on Twitter.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah.
Out of the Toe Jam and Earl games, Panic on Funkotron is the only one I actually played. I didn't even know the first one was an isometric game until, like, years after the fact.
Yeah. And nobody knows the third one exists.
There's actually, funny enough, there's actually two versions of the third one. There's the final release that came out on the Xbox, but there was actually a version made for the Dreamcast that's a totally different game. It wasn't quite finished, but it did get dumped onto the internet a couple of years ago, so you can play it. So there's technically two versions of Toe Jam and Earl 3. A lot of people actually say the Dreamcast version is better, which is weird, because it's the unfinished game, and it's totally different.
Yeah. So, and then to answer the first part of the question, I probably have to go with, like, the sequel that disappointed me the most. I gotta go with Mass Effect Andromeda. The Mass Effect trilogy, you know, the 7th gen games are possibly, like, my favorite video game series of all time. They're like my Shenmue. I really, really, really love that series. I basically replay them like annually at any given time, just because there's so much to do and still like kind of discover about them. And then on the Xbox One and PS4, they released a sequel game called Mass Effect Andromeda, which it's not a direct sequel. It kind of takes place in a different galaxy, but with the same kind of type of game, and bugs aside, because the game was notoriously buggy and unfinished when it launched. Even bugs aside, like the story and the characters and even like the core gameplay, I really, really disliked over the original, to the point that I never was able to even finish the game. I tried picking up it a few times just because I'm like, maybe it'll be better this time, because I really want to like it, because I love Mass Effect so much. And the game is so terrible that it basically torpedoed the entire franchise until very recently with the Legendary Edition reissue and the announcement of Mass Effect 5. So that's definitely my least favorite sequel.
So Chuck actually mentioned one of the games that I actually totally agree with him on, and this probably would have been my answer. This sequel was bizarre. I loved it, but I think I was kind of, I'm not going to say alone in that, but there was a lot fewer people that I think liked it than the original, and that was Power Stone 2 on the Dreamcast. If you guys ever played those two games, I think that first game is, like, amazing. But the second one, while fun, was more of like a party game. Like, you basically had to have 4 players for it to have any real meaningful experience with it. And under those conditions, if you actually had 4 people, I'd say it was the superior game. But without 4 people, it's the vastly inferior game, because trying to play that game with AI is just like almost boring. Because it's supposed to be like a thing where like all 4 of your characters are like running through like a big like, you know, mat, almost like a platformer together, completely different than the first game, which was essentially a fighting game. And then you could gain your power-ups and you could attack baddies and stuff like that as they came. But if you're doing that by yourself and 4 bots or 3 other bots, it's just not, it's not as interesting, because you can't really use strategy, because it's essentially just AI running around. But when you could actually get other people together, that was a blast. And then the game, maybe I didn't phrase this right, but I was trying to say, like, what's a game you loved where the sequel totally annihilated you or broke your heart? The game, and I've said it many times in the past, one of my all-time favorite games ever was Twisted Metal 2 on the PlayStation. And the game that ripped the heart out of the franchise was Twisted Metal 3, and it honestly, it never really recovered. I love Twisted Metal Black. That was kind of a nice little resurgence, but it didn't really last. And we haven't... Twisted Metal 2012 was not very good, and believe it or not, that was the last time we had a game. It was 10 years ago in that franchise.
Did you ever play the PS2 port of the PSP game Twisted Metal Head
Up? Yes, I did, but I don't. One. Yeah, I liked it just fine, but I don't have any great memories of it, and that's probably just due to age and when I played it. Yeah. But I mean, those are also totally different development teams, but that makes sense. It switched hands like 4 times. But yeah, Twisted Metal 3 for me really just broke my heart, and like I almost hated the franchise after that. And we still like that actually is really kind of depressing to me, because Twisted Metal was, until the PS4 came along, and technically the Vita, Twisted Metal was the only franchise that had existed on every Sony platform up till that point. Vita, they straight up just never did one. They could still technically put one out on the PS4, although that's highly unlikely, and then PS5 as well. But yeah, that's a little thing about Sony, is they were always kind of bad with their mascots, and they've never really had a consistent one. Sweet Tooth as their mascot was the only one that held on, but even that was last accurate, a decade ago.
Yeah.
What about you, Joseph?
I honestly don't really have something that like fully fits this. Like the closest thing I can actually think of as far as like a sequel that disappointed me goes is I'm sure I'm going to get shit on in the comments for this, but Resident Evil 7. And even then, that's less because of gameplay reasons of going back to... I mean, I guess it's part of it, because at that point, Resident Evil had mostly shifted to the whole action thing, and then it went back to survival horror, which on paper sounds good, but then this game, like Resident Evil 7, honestly, until like the last like 5 minutes, there's no reason for it to be a Resident Evil game. Because most of the plot... I mean, yeah, it's a survival horror thing, but like most of the plot doesn't really connect to it at all, and then it connects until it connects to the rest of the series very, very stupidly. So
I totally agree with you. I think we've actually talked about this, but just to keep it short, I feel like Resident Evil completely dies after Code Veronica. Like, everything after that is just basically not canon. Resident Evil 4, I think, is the original sin. Like, Resident Evil 4 in of itself is an enjoyable game, even though it's different, but it introduced so many bizarre elements that they took into the extreme eventually, like the buying merch stuff and, you know, kind of that third-person perspective, but with, like, a consistent camera. Even though that game in of itself, in its own small pocket is okay. It's just beyond that, just drove the series into the ground. And while I love Resident Evil 7 as a game, it should have been called, like, Bad Night in the Bayou or something. It should not have been called Resident Evil, because, as you're right, it has absolutely nothing to do with anything. I liked Resident Evil 8 a lot, and at least it attempted more to be part of Resident Evil, but in a really shoehorned kind of way.
Yeah, I still haven't played that one. I have it, and I've been meaning to at least try it, but it's like...
It's very good, but it's a lot like Resident Evil 7 until until suddenly it's, oh, hey, it's Chris Redfield.
I mean, yeah, I get that a lot of the fan base was like complaining, being like, you have to go back to survival horror. Why isn't it survival horror like ever since like 5? But it's just like there was no reason for it to be. If it was not a Resident Evil game, I mean, it's possible I might not have played it, but I probably would have enjoyed it more because it was like, okay, this is its own thing. This works out well. But then it's like, okay. But it's just like, when I'm playing a Resident Evil game, I care about the stuff that, like, already happened. Like, I'm someone who actually enjoyed Resident Evil 5 and Resident Evil 6 for what they were. And, like, the over-the-top stupid plot. But...
I mean, that's where I kind of diverged. It's like, I really thought that Resident Evil 7 was absolutely needed because the series had jumped the shark and gotten so fucking convoluted and just absolutely ridiculous in terms of its plot and kind of lore that I'm just like, you need to fucking start over. And granted, like, I don't have a lot of nostalgia for the early Resident Evil games. Like, my favorite Resident Evil game is Resident Evil 4. Just because I think it's just the best playing game in the series. But my series that I was very nostalgic for was Silent Hill. And Silent Hill went through the same shit, where the games on, like, the Xbox 360 and PS3... and on the Wii, it's like it had jumped the shark so fucking bad that it just needed to be rebooted. And the ironic thing was that they were going to do the exact same thing that Resident Evil ended up doing, converting the game into a first-person survival horror, going back to its roots, and with the PT demo, which Resident Evil 7 lifts a lot of inspiration from.
I actually read comments somewhere. I don't know how true it is, but the dev team who was working on 7, they saw the preview thing for Silent Hills back when that was going to be a thing. Where then basically went, "Fuck, god damn it."
Yeah, exactly. So I liked Resident Evil 7. I haven't played 8, just because I'm. But that's the difference, is that I was not invested in the lore that much, and I'm more a fan of atmospheric content and gameplay, as opposed to trying to shoehorn in tank controls in a game in 2017.
You don't need the tank controls. That's not the important part.
But it's for a lot of people it is. Like, that tank controls is the default survival horror control scheme, in the way that the dual analog stick Halo style of controls is the default for first person shooters now. So I think that series needed a fucking refresh, and we got it in some aspects with the Revelations games. I do like those, but I much prefer the direction the series has taken since it's gone bad. Yeah. That said, stay tuned for our Thor: Love and Thunder coverage.
Oh God. Yeah, we're not there yet, but
I still haven't seen that.
that's well, you don't have to be part of that discussion. That's just gonna be Keith and us being like, "What was this?" Okay, we'll get back to that though. But that's we'll move on to the next subject. So thank you, Chuck, for this particular one. So our next subject is from a new Patreon backer, who's a guy in my Discord who goes by the name Cox, Kox. You dirty-minded people. And so we were talking about anniversaries and how September is significant. He wanted us to talk a little about the Dreamcast, and specifically. He wanted us to talk about the experience of playing a game on the Dreamcast versus playing a Dreamcast game that has been re-released on another platform, kind of like the pros and the cons of it. So that actually got me thinking, and as much as I love the Dreamcast, if you were to sit down and make a list of like the 20 top games for that system, I would argue like 19 of them exist on other platforms, thus this question makes sense. In fact, the only significant Dreamcast game that people remember that was like a first-party title and a big deal that is still exclusive to that platform is Crazy Taxi 2. That's it. Everything else has been brought over to some other platform at some point, if not multiple platforms, because Sega re-released them so often. However, as a lot of you probably know, but if you don't, it's a little refresher. When Sega was going hard with the Dreamcast, they also did a lot of corporate tie-in stuff to pay for a lot of the bills. So that's why games like Shenmue would have, at least in the Japanese version, would have Coca-Cola machines in them. But they would also have Timex watches and all these like random corporate tie-ins. Crazy Taxi infamously would have like Pizza Hut and stuff in it. It would have music from Offspring, stuff like that. So there's a lot of stuff like that where when they did the re-releases, they could no longer include those things. And that has a serious effect on the game, I think. So first of all, I'm going to ask you, do either of you, have you played any game that's associated with the Dreamcast that got released on another platform? And if you've played both versions, what did you think?
Sonic, so far the only thing I've played extensively on the Dreamcast has been Sonic Adventure, and even then, my first experience that was the GameCube port, and that's been ported to everything. But from what I hear from a lot of people, like the ports for the Sonic Adventure games actually aren't that good. So I'm actually kind of glad I have both of them on the Dreamcast now. I just need to sit down and play them fully.
I'm inclined to agree with the first Sonic game. I think it's better on the Dreamcast, but I prefer the sequel, Sonic Adventure 2, on the GameCube. So, it's you could kind of call it a 50-50 split.
Yeah, I might have just be conflating them to both of them when it's actually only relevant to Sonic Adventure. I don't actually know.
So I've played both of them like 100 times, so I can tell you exactly where I stand on that. Sonic Adventure 1 is definitely better on the Dreamcast. I mean, they basically built the console around that game, so that makes a lot of sense. The two were very married together. And when they did the GameCube Director's Cut edition, which initially looked better to a lot of people, and then you realize it didn't really perform as well, and it was something about it was just kind of off. And then
everything's
what they
so
did
shiny
after
in that one.
Yeah, what they eventually did is a PC conversion more based off the Dreamcast edition that, it's like it was a nicer resolution, but it didn't quite, I don't know, it just didn't hit the same way. That version, the PC version, is the one they've ported over to things like the 360 and the PS3 and all that sort of stuff that now are compatible with the Xbox One and Series X and so on and so forth. So the Dreamcast version essentially still remains exclusively on the Dreamcast, and that's where I personally prefer to play it because it really was built that way. That said, Sonic Adventure 2, what Rob said is completely correct. And the reason for that is Sonic Adventure 2 was simply not done when they had to release it on the Dreamcast. It is buggier on that system. It runs fine. It's very playable, but it clearly was like a big bug patch away from completion. And that big bug patch is called Sonic Adventure 2 Battle for the GameCube, which basically finished up those little issues. There's less like bugs in it. There's also better visualizations in some places. Not so much just because GameCube hardware was better, even though it was, but they had additional time to kind of polish around the edges. One of the big bugs that exist in in Sonic Adventure 2 is a lot of times characters' voices would cut each other off. It still happens in the GameCube version, but it's less guilty of it. Stuff like that. So yeah, I'm with Rob on that. The only additional like functionality was all that Chow stuff, which is you have to really be into that to care about that part. But so some of the other obvious examples, I mean, I have to mention is the Shenmue re-releases. For the longest time, that was like the last big holdout for a major Dreamcast game, was particularly Shenmue 1. I still personally prefer playing them on the Dreamcast, though that might partially be based on nostalgia. Although I would not deny the convenience of playing them on, say, the Xbox One or Series X or PS4 or PS5. And there's certain advantages to that, like the abolition of load times and the widescreen capabilities and slightly reduced tank controls. You have multiple options there. And in particular, the first game has better saving options. The problem with that release initially is that they had bugs they had not patched out of it yet. They eventually got to them, and for the most part, they got it working, although there's some stuff that they never fixed. It's minor things, but yeah, the Dreamcast version doesn't suffer that. The Dreamcast version also has the superior audio, as it turns out, just because of where they were able to source the files from, where... Yeah, the re-releases couldn't do that, but the re-releases have other advantages. Like you can have you can have both Japanese and English audio if you want, or subtitles. You can mix and match whatever you like. So there's stuff like that that's nice.
It's not a pain in the ass to import your save either.
Yeah, that too. Yeah, Crazy Taxi 1 has been re-released a bunch of times. That game is infamous for its score. Like Offspring did it, the band. And they simply could not exist in anything other than the Dreamcast version. Well, actually, they might be in the GameCube version. I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, they are.
Oh, they are. Okay, so that was like the same era, so that kind of makes sense. But like the 360 version and the PC version, all that stuff, it's like it looks better. It's in widescreen, but all the corporate stuff is gone. So they no longer like, hey, take me to Pizza Hut. They're like, hey, take me to pizza. Or whatever, and it feels more vanilla and bland. It doesn't feel as real. And then the score, of course, isn't there, which is such a huge component of that game. So I feel like
I can't imagine playing a Crazy Taxi game without like the music.
Yeah. That's not. Yep, that's not there. So I never liked the quote unquote upgraded version of that. Trying to think. I know Soul Calibur was re-released. Ikaruga, of course, was re-released a few times. Jet Grind Radio was eventually, but only in digital form. Sega actually did a pretty good job with that one. And I believe they were able to keep all the music, oddly enough. So that's pretty cool. I never actually played the 360 conversion of Sonic Adventure 2, so I don't know about that. Off the top of my head, that's what comes to mind. I would say in most cases, I prefer the Dreamcast original ones, but a lot of the re-releases do have certain advantages, and logically so. But that's the interesting thing about those Dreamcast re-releases is usually they aren't just straight re-releases. They usually are sacrificing some content because they had to, like, again, music or corporate tie-in stuff, but then replacing it with certain additional features like better load times and so on and so forth. So yeah, mixed bag. Do you guys have any other examples you can think of?
It might sound kind of sacrilegious, especially to you who doesn't like portables. I actually like the Power Stone collection on PSP better than the console release. I just feel that those games just really translate well to kind of just like an on-the-go experience for me. Yeah, I like having both of them in kind of a single package. So
I find that strange.
I'm sorry?
Particularly because I find that strange, particularly because the second game really requires like 4 people to get the most out of it.
Yeah, it's but I generally don't play that with multiplayer anyway, so it's.
I know that but that
one for me. So,
like, literally, we talked about that earlier. Like, usually that game was designed to have 4 people going at once.
I think the one that most people would tend to agree with me on is Skies of Arcadia Legends on the GameCube is, I think far superior to the Dreamcast release.
Oh man, I forgot all about that one.
Yeah, I've heard conflicting things on that, but I've only played the GameCube one, and I played the GameCube one like a couple of years ago. So my impression of it was that it's okay. Of Skies of Arcadia was it's okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not an RPG guy. I mean, neither is Adam, really. But I mean, I liked kind of the story and art style of that game, so that's why I have it on the GameCube. I definitely played better in my experience over the Dreamcast version.
Yeah, in my case, I am, or at the very least, was an RPG guy. I haven't really played a ton of RPGs lately, but so in my case, by the time I got around to Skies of Arcadia, it's like, yeah, I mean, this is cool. I've seen a lot of this stuff before, which basically, it's just like I've seen everything or a lot of the stuff that happened to it in later games, so it's just like,
Yeah.
So, I mean, it was still good. It was still enjoyable, but it was like, wow, this was not the mind-blowing masterpiece everyone claims it is. But that part of that is just going to be passage of time, too.
Yeah. I can't speak to that one specifically because I have never played it because, again, I'm not an RPG guy. But, yeah, I think that's pretty sufficient for this subject. What do you guys think? Do you have anything else you can think of? All right. Well, thank you very much, Cox, for picking that. Looking forward to the next one. Also, that'll do it for now. We'll be back in a bit with Keith. So, Joseph, thank you very much for joining us and really just, committing to all of these at the same time. I appreciate that.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Always, man. Always. We went out and we saw Thor: Love and Thunder. That's how I'm going to segue into that one.
And watched Thor: Love and Thunder.
Yeah, that would be more accurate. I watched it on Disney Plus too.
I actually saw it in the theaters myself, and I'm a little sad about the money I spent on certain aspects of it. That's for sure.
All right, so yeah, that's what this entire subject is going to be. We're getting around to Thor: Love and Thunder. Who wants to try this? Like, who wants to even start?
Look, Thor: Love and Thunder took everything you loved about Thor Ragnarok, amped it up way too much, and started annoying you with it. Is one of the best ways I want to put Thor: Love and Thunder. Because Thor Ragnarok was the bringing back of Thor to his own original movies. His original movies had died with Thor 2, The Dark World, and this was his big comeback with Thor Ragnarok, and everyone loved it. But unfortunately, what we loved about Thor Ragnarok was not what they put into Thor: Love and Thunder. The Thor: Love and Thunder happens to have a little bit of a tone to it, where it's plays off more like a witty buddy comedy rather than an epic MCU Thor film in a certain way. It's kind of how I put it at the beginning, anyways.
To me, if I was really just going to truncate this, it would be Thor: The Dark World made by Taika Waititi.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
That's exactly what it is, because it's very surface level funny. It's like everything's just going to try to have a punchline, even if it doesn't really make sense. It has a totally pointless plot revolving around Natalie Portman's character, Jane Foster. Like, she's the center of the universe, which we'll get back into that. And then the villain is the epitome of revenge from some guy. I mean, Christian Bale did a good job with the material he was given, but fundamentally it's the typical, like, revenge from some guy we've never heard of plot. Okay. And that's the movie. It sucks.
So, I wouldn't say it sucks. It's not good. It's not good.
Right.
Despite all of the problems which you guys have already started, it's still the second best Thor movie, because
sadly, yes, I agree with that.
Fish out of water story with, like, a dumb as rocks character, and Dark World is my least favorite MCU movie. I fall asleep every time I try to watch that movie. This is it's. I think we all got lulled into a really nice like sense of security by Ragnarok, because I mean I love Taika Waititi as a filmmaker. Jojo Rabbit is one of the best films in the past 10 years. I love What We Do in the Shadows. His work on Our Flag Means Death is great. Yeah, and Ragnarok, as we said, we all like Ragnarok, but I don't know. I think the problems with this movie are, yes, absolutely tonally, but I think it's just a problem with the character, maybe, in that I just don't know if Thor's a good superhero to have movies about. I don't know. I've never been really compelled with him. Even in Ragnarok, he's like the least entertaining part of that movie, because what Hulk is going through is interesting, and obviously with Valkyrie, and Jeff Goldblum is a national treasure. You know, I don't know. It's fine. It's fine. It's just not.
Yeah.
It's just not what we all wanted it to be.
I would agree with that.
Well, I say that Thor, in this particular version of Thor, this more playful, likes to make his little jokes, Thor plays a little bit more as part of the ensemble than an actual singular character, which is a problem for him having a singular movie.
Granted, I think Hulk is the same way. I think he's better in an ensemble.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a good way to put that. Yeah, there are certain characters, especially the the two most powerful characters of the Avengers, granted, Thor and Hulk, being as though they had to join movies up in order to have their own movie type of thing. And now that Hulk is being continued on in a TV show almost with like She-Hulk, you know.
I want to add something to that, though. This is behind the camera stuff. Hulk cannot have solo films without Universal Pictures involved.
Yes.
So technically, that's why you've never seen a Hulk movie since The Incredible Hulk with Edward Norton. There's a reason for that. Now, I agree. The Ang Lee Hulk, terrible film. Incredible Hulk, at best, a bad film. It's not good. But it's kind of interesting. We've never really seen Disney and the MCU actually try to make a Hulk movie specifically. It would be interesting to give them a shot, but I also think they'll never do it because they don't want to deal with Universal Studios, but they can use the character when they're not making a solo film. Hence Thor Ragnarok, as you said. But Thor, they own lock, stock, and barrel. And people like Chris Hemsworth, they like Thor, and those movies make money, or at least Thor Ragnarok did. So it's not surprising this got made. But how this was what they wanted to make, I do not understand. Because when you look at Thor Ragnarok, it basically course-corrected the previous two Thor movies. A lot of people are saying the problem with these Thor movies is you're taking it way too seriously, and he's like a wet blanket, blah, blah, blah. I think Kevin Smith actually talked Taika Waititi into taking that into a different direction. There's actually a story about that online. Hence, the Chris Hemsworth version of him is so radically different in that third film. But that movie comes off of the heels of the Avengers Age of Ultron stuff, where you follow up what happened with him. It feels like a next piece, but also sets up Infinity War very well, and like where Thor's going to be with his people destroyed and all that sort of stuff. It feels like there was a point to it. This has no point. Like, it kind of tries to start off with it, like, because everybody was expecting Thordians of the Galaxy, that to the point where that was the title for a while.
It was of the Galaxy.
Asgardians of the Galaxy, Thordians of the Galaxy. Like, there was a bunch of different names, and that would have been awesome. We saw like 2 minutes of that idea, but when you're watching it, you can tell they basically were like, we have to technically get him out of this situation. We can't just ignore it. So let's film enough stuff that we get him out of there, and all the other characters are just gone from the movie. And then he can go back to having his own solo adventure, which is back. I cannot believe they went back to the Jane Foster stuff. Like, nothing against Natalie Portman, but she's like the worst part of those movies. And that's kind of a lot, considering how bad those movies are. Like, her character is just totally unnecessary. Yeah. To the point where in the Avengers movies where she should have been around, she's like referenced, but never even shows up.
Yep. There's like a bad stock photo of her or something in one of them, I think.
Yeah.
Well,
I think it's Age of
when he
Ultron
goes back
actually.
in time to get the what is hammer or something like that, or the stone.
Yeah, well, that you're thinking of Endgame.
They use like a past footage for that one for sure.
Yeah.
You're thinking of
Yeah.
You're thinking of Endgame, and that she actually they used deleted footage. Natalie Portman,
but they showed a
recorded some
picture
lines.
of her in another thing, right?
Yes, that's where I was going with it.
Yeah.
In Age of Ultron, they show a photo of her, and she's mentioned. I think even in the first Avengers, it's the exact same thing. But she just wasn't important enough. So why did we feel the need to come back to an entire story revolving around her?
Now, I'm wondering if it's because of what they were taking off from story-wise from the comic books. Because they are leaning heavily from the story from the comic books, and especially on his look. When he first gets back into his kind of Thor look with the when he's back in shape and he's got his kind of like fur cape or whatnot, that's a almost direct look from the comic book there. And James Foster is a very, very mini version of James Foster's storyline in the actual comic book, which is fairly recent, which is very interesting. And so I believe, so it didn't come out of nowhere. There's, you actually have the references in the comic books, but without that built-up character behind all of that stuff, it has no weight like it does in the comic books. In the comic books, it's like, oh my god, there's James Foster. I mean, oh, this is insane. I mean, oh, it actually meant something. Here, like Adam said, this wasn't really a character. It was a shoot-in love interest for him to have, or in the first movie. So she really didn't matter. But in the comic book, she does. So it's kind of weird how they try to get a good character from comic books, into the movies, without doing any type of actual character work. No,
I think this is exactly what they wanted with the success of Ragnarok. They knew what they were doing. They're like, oh, do the thing with the funny punchlines and shit. It's like Marvel is just like utterly and totally obsessed with the fucking formula to the point where they can't see the forest through the trees anymore. Oh, Ragnarok did good. Do more Ragnarok. Bring back the rock monster with the New Zealand accent. That's funny. And do this and make it over the top. This movie is the equivalent of fucking soda. It is saccharine and sweet and has zero nutritional value. And I guess it makes Thor a dad now. I guess that's the end of this movie. And that's it. That, who gives a shit about canon? It's Wonder Woman 84. It's just a thing that happened and people saw it and it was just not good.
It was definitely not what people thought it was going to be. It's another game of the overhyped Marvel. Again, the reason why I do these in particular is actually I get blasted with overhype in my job with listening to the kids at high school talk about these movies and stuff like that. And being a comic book fan, it feels almost like a slap in the face to a lot of characters I have grown up with and admired all of my life. And a lot of aspects of Thor's character, majority of people have no clue about because they've never, ever, ever picked up an actual Thor comic book, which is very different. People actually think they're talking about the myth of Thor from the Asgardian, or from the Norse religion, rather than a comic book character who has his own history, his own life. I mean, one take from Donald Blake. All we get is some stupid joke about Donald Blake, not the actual lesson of Donald Blake. I'm sorry. Yeah. I'm ranting because Rob kind of got me on a little pissy about it, too. Because I am pissy about certain parts of Thor. I mean, what I think is missing from all superheroes is the actual values of superheroes. There are no values of the superheroes in any of these superheroes anymore. They all just seem to want to just swing and fight and hit things, right? It's like, oh, that's how you solve the problem. You just swing your frickin' hammer around. You don't need to do anything. You don't need to change. You don't need to go through actual real stuff. And Thor, if you look at it in the MCU, actually has one of the most tragic and worst stories of any MCU character, with his family dying, his brother, who he has no clue of another version of him is alive right now. I mean, his people are destroyed. All his friends dust.
Oh, that's
everybody.
That's glossed over.
Yeah.
In the intro of the movie, it's like, yeah, he died and she died and they all died. His planet blew up and yeah.
The less of gravitas they put into his world, the less impact it's gonna have. Why can't we have a more in-depth Thor world, man? Why do they have to just they picked the wrong parts of Ragnarok to go 100 on, I guess.
Yeah.
I guess that's what it was. But that's maybe what brought in the general public, which is what brings in the dollars, which brings in the money. Follow the formula, that will bring in this amount of money, like you said, Rob, and we'll just go from there. Why take a fucking chance, right?
All right, so yes, this movie was a financial success. I was just looking at its numbers. I don't know the budget, but I'm assuming it was probably like $150, $200 million movie. Worldwide gross was $755 million. So even if this movie sucked in the eyes of us, or at least was displeasurable at best, it made money, so Disney's going to be happy with it regardless. And you can't fault them for that. People went to see their money, and people who enjoyed the movie, great. I'm glad you got something out of it. This was, as Rob said, actually not the worst Thor movie. I would actually rank it number 2, which is kind of depressing. Ragnarok, I would say, is the best Thor movie. This one, by default, comes into second place. Then, honestly, I can't believe I'm going to say this. I would give it to the Dark World and third over the original, but only like by a hair. They're both terrible, but at least some stuff happens in Dark World. Nothing happens in that first film. Absolutely nothing happens. But anyway, so that's whatever. Now, I'm going to try and talk about some things in this film I actually enjoyed, and then certain things I had questions about, and so on and so forth. Overall, the structure of this film is incredibly cookie cutter. It's just, we have our character, a hero's journey type of character, but you have to reset that because you can't follow up his normal storylines, which is why they do all that Guardians of the Galaxy stuff like right at the beginning just to get that out of the way. They do a whole bunch of narration, like you said, to build up, here's all the people in his life who died, that way you get a sense of who the character is, but we can all get all this out of the way, and reset everything kind of back to zero, as if this movie takes place almost immediately after the second Thor movie, so that Jane's alive and everybody can have their continued little playtime together. That's essentially what this movie does in the first, 10 minutes, just to get us right back to that 0 point. From there, he can have his arc of I'm depressed and I'm inward, and then eventually, throughout the events of the film, I learn to open up and love again. That's the story. That's really all that happens. And it doesn't do it particularly well, but that's largely, as I said before, because Jane Foster is not a particularly interesting character. She never really was. She should have been. She probably could have been, had those first two movies had given Natalie Portman anything to do of substance or had been interesting, but you can't change that. What would have also been better, and I'm just spouting this as perfect world stuff, let's talk about how she actually becomes Thor. The first film establishes that anyone can, wield Mjolnir if they are worthy. Okay, that's, and the way it's phrased, you assume it's a man, but it can be a woman. I have no issues with that whatsoever. It's just that it doesn't really make sense that all of a sudden Jane is able to wield the fragments of Mjolnir. First of all, because it's destroyed, but okay, I kind of like the idea that they could do something with that. But they try to retcon it in this film with one line that kind of just happens out of nowhere when they have this whole big back scene. I mean, you'll notice this in the film. They show more of the relationship between Thor and Jane Foster in flashbacks than the actual movies that were supposed to set those up ever did. Okay, and so you can tell that those were not filmed back in the day, because, Natalie Portman was always going to be a gorgeous woman in my eyes, but she aged 10 years since the last time I saw her in anything. I don't know, this movie...
And they didn't dye Chris Hemsworth eyebrows blonde.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's a look from much later on, and you can definitely tell they were shot for this movie in particular. So.
Precisely. So there's a part where he's sitting next to Mjolnir, and I think he's wearing that hot dog costume or something, and he starts talking to Mjolnir and asking Mjolnir to protect Jane if anything ever happens to her. That is the establishment for why when she suddenly goes to New Asgard and she's got cancer and she's walking around Mjolnir, all of a sudden it comes to life to protect her. I thought that was weak as hell.
Oh yeah.
I don't know if it's better established in the comics or whatever. To be fair to this film, it's not this film's fault that the first two movies did that so badly. It has to fix it. I get that. But as a viewer, that's not our responsibility. We're just watching this, and the way it comes off is it doesn't quite work. A lot of this movie feels like well, in order for this to work, we have to do this. This is not what we want to do, but we have to make it work. So much of this movie functions like that. Again, getting the Guardians of the Galaxy stuff out of the way, us reestablishing their entire backstory. Like, that's why this movie doesn't work, because like a third of it is things they had to do just to fill in the gaps. One of the big consequences of that is that the villain gets almost no focus. We'll get back to that in a minute, but I want to focus on the Jane thing. So she, without intentionally doing this, she manages to get the fragments to kind of like reform into Mjolnir, which presents questions, because if she could do that, why couldn't Thor when this originally happened?
So obviously in Ragnarok, Mjolnir was shattered by Hela.
It was actually the right
yes.
spot. It was the exact spot it fell.
I will say that point, though, when you get around to that same area where they're talking about Mjolnir and she gets the power, right before that, I think is the single greatest moment of that entire film, which is Sam Neill as Odin and Matt Damon as Loki. I actually forget who plays Thor in that, but I will give it
the other. It's the other Hemsworth,
the other guy,
not Liam and not Chris.
Oh, it's the third Hemsworth, the one that nobody ever remembers. Okay, yeah, I know what you're talking about. Not the one who was in the terrible Independence Day sequel. The
third one.
Okay, the third one. That's actually
Billy
pretty.
Baldwin.
Right, gotcha. And you got to give it to Melissa McCarthy. I can't believe I liked her in something.
She was actually hilarious. I enjoyed her. Yeah, you're right. I haven't enjoyed her anything ever, other than that one movie with the girls going out for like a bachelorette party. I thought that was pretty funny.
Oh, Bridesmaids, the only one anybody likes her in.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, but anyway, yeah, she was actually good in that role, and I think that was kind of hilariously perfect casting for her. But it's funny. Actually, one part of this movie I really hated, and I really wish they hadn't done it at all, was the part where Natalie Portman's like explaining how wormholes work with the whole like I'm folding a piece of paper thing, because she even makes fun of the fact that every movie that has to explain it does it the same way. Event Horizon did it that way. Interstellar did it that way, and then she's telling them you should go see Interstellar and stuff like that. And I'm like, no, there are actors in this movie that are in Interstellar. No, don't reference that. Like Matt Damon's in both of them.
I hate when they do that.
Yeah, I don't like that, especially when you have so many big name actors that kind of recycle into the same films. But whatever, that doesn't really matter. It's just a little pet peeve thing of mine.
I do like that the actors come back later to bring up the very important question. I like.
Is it too soon? Can we get started?
Yeah, that was great.
Like I said, those two, especially Matt Damon, are like my favorite moment of that film. Just the way they portray him like you would at a medieval times. Like they're just really bad at it, but they take it very seriously. Kind of like a sideshow Mel or something on The Simpsons. Okay, so but that's the comedy that works. There's a lot of comedy that is unnecessary and doesn't whatever. Again, we'll go back to the Jane Foster thing. Her wielding it, I feel like that could have worked if they had established it better, but like we said, they really didn't. And then they kind of don't ever really acknowledge it that much. They're like, oh, you have Mjolnir. Yeah. Cool. Well, let's go fight stuff. Like, they spend almost no time being like, how? Like, how did this happen? What, oh, you have cancer? Well, but having Mjolnir and the powers of Thor don't save it or, stop the cancer, I guess. They actually make it worse, which is weird. I don't know how that works, but that could be a lore thing that I just don't get.
It's the opposite in comic books. It actually extends her life in the comic books. It's weird.
Okay. Which, interestingly, they brings us to the point where, so if you step back from this and try to look at the overall tapestry of what I think Marvel is trying to do with this, is I think they're trying to focus on gods and celestial beings, hence things like the Eternals. We're dealing with that sort of stuff, but also this movie is like, okay, our villain is going to be a guy who is a god hunter, which we're going to get back to him in a bit. But all the gods are basically like Zeus and all the demigods and all those type of guys. And I will say that I quite enjoyed Russell Crowe as Zeus. I found that to be good casting. I enjoyed that quite a bit.
Although I don't know, I guess he was going for a Greek accent.
Is that what he was going for? I don't know what that accent was. I wasn't exactly sure what he was doing.
I'm like, does he think Greeks and Italians like speak the same, or it's just I think he's going Mediterranean accent, but like he needs to pick one and stick with it.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I don't think he had a consistency there, but I didn't need it. Like I still liked him in that role.
He was great. Yeah.
Yeah, and then, I mean, if to jump ahead all the way to the end here, like, Jane dies and she goes to Valhalla, and, then the bonus scene, Zeus is still alive, and he's like, for too long, we've been decadent and just kind of doing nothing. We need to actually, like, get involved in stuff now, blah, blah, blah. So, like, I feel like that's going to play a role into things, or at least that's kind of where they're going with it, and how that will eventually maybe tie to celestial beings and all that might be a thing.
Yeah.
We will see.
They definitely got that going, you're right.
Yeah, so we'll ignore that for the moment. But let's talk about Christian Bale's character.
He did such a good job with what he had. I enjoyed every time he was on screen, actually. I must say. I enjoyed watching
I actually completely agree. Christian Bale did an amazing performance with nothing. He had nothing to work with. There were parts of this film where I forgot he was even in it. Not because of him, but because he's just, like, not in the movie or a relevant threat or anything for so long. Yeah. Like, he's not relevant to much of anything for most of the film. Like, they give him this backstory that's kind of like, oh, all right, I see how this could have come to be, sort of. I think they could have done it better, but okay, fine. It's like the elevator pitch version of a backstory, but okay. But then, ultimately, he's just revenge from some guy. Which is always, I hate stories like that, where they're not established figures that we have built up over time, and then we see their plan play out. It's like this guy who, aforementioned, has never existed before. Suddenly he's there. He's apparently the most significant thing ever. And he just wants revenge on the main characters for some reason that's usually very contrived. And then he fails. So, it's always the plot.
So this is what I'm going to say. Gore the God Butcher, the Dark Elves from... Dark World, Ronan the Accuser, Whiplash from Iron Man 2, the villain from Iron Man 3. It
goes on and on.
Marvel has the worst villains, and it took them fucking forever to kind of like start writing that ship, like Kilgrave and Jessica Jones, but even that's like not fucking canon anymore. It's like they've always just had the worst villains, and this is just like another cookie cutter thing. Like the imagery, super cool. Like Christian Bale, like emaciated. I guess he likes doing that. He does that for a few roles now. I'm surprised, honestly. Like I would have pictured him to be kind of done with superhero shit after Batman. Like he said pretty vehemently that he would never do Batman again.
Let me put this out. Not to interrupt you, but let me put this out here real quick.
Yeah.
Batman, the last time he played Batman was a decade ago.
I know.
How does that make you feel?
I know. But
anyway, go on.
Yeah, so
there's been two other Batmans.
They must have like wheeled the fucking dump truck full of Marvel money, like, and into his front yard and be like, "Play this random fucking villain that's gonna be a one-off." Like, I mean,
all right, man. I would have thought he,
it's like asking like Daniel Day-Lewis to be, the next Iron Man villain,
Can we talk a little bit about the behind the scenes of this film? So, all right, one thing I'm going to throw out there. So, a lot of people are not liking Marvel Phase 4. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But one of them that's kind of essential is that Kevin Feige has actually been very reduced in his role during this phase of things. I guess Disney put him in charge of other things. So they've been kind of letting other people kind of decide where stuff goes. I feel like that's playing a role in this. Because I agree with you, Rob, that I think what everyone wanted was as Guardians of the Galaxy. And I think Taika Waititi probably signed up with the assumption that that's what they were making. But I think there's two factors to this. One, clearly not Kevin Feige, the team producing it, had some sort of other agenda, and I don't like to play this card, but it's probably, well, hey, wait a minute, Jane Foster could be Thor. That would be cool because she's a woman. And when I say agenda, I just mean like that type of comic book story. Yes, they're pushing that more than they are, I think, than what they probably should have done. Maybe I don't think I guess what I'm trying to say is I don't think Kevin Feige would have made this movie. If he had like full control of it, like he did in previous phases, because I don't. Other than the gods thing, which is at best weak, this doesn't really establish anything. It basically just kind of kills off what people wanted to see, again, as Guardians of the Galaxy, which would have been great.
I think they could have done it with, like, honestly, I think they could have done it, like, in a buddy road trip thing with Rocket Raccoon, Groot, fucking, Star-Lord, and Thor. If they wanted to do that, they could have done that. You know, I just don't think that's what Marvel wanted that necessarily to do. It's like, because they've got two more Guardians of the Galaxy things coming out in the next year and a half. So it's like, and then they've said that franchise is done after that. Yeah,
that's all I'm saying is that's unfortunate, because that's personally what I would have wanted to see. But maybe we still will. Maybe we still will.
Speaking of people being done, honestly, the thing I was surprised with this movie was that Thor didn't pass on the mantle of the character to Jane Foster.
No, she passed away.
I was expecting, okay, this is Chris Hemsworth's last movie, because you already got rid of Robert Downey Jr. and Chris Evans, and obviously, you know, with She-Hulk, they're trying to phase out Mark Ruffalo. Like, the Phase 1 characters are kind of going away and being replaced, and like I was certain they were going to do like Lady Thor as the new Thor.
At first, I was thinking the same thing, but I gotta say, I never would think in a million years that Natalie Portman would agree to do multiple films for some reason. That's the reason why that stopped my thinking there.
Yeah, I honestly don't think she had any enjoyment fucking playing the character in any of the movies. You know.
Yeah,
I think she's gone on the record to saying so.
It seemed a bit, best way to put it seemed a bit Padme fake, if you'd want to put it. Like, her acting...
Speaking of which, did you hear this story? She actually told this, I think, in an interview. Or maybe
tell, yeah.
So Taika Waititi is directing this movie, and he's excited to work with Natalie Portman, but Taika, if you don't know, has been given the keys to Star Wars, like do like a movie or a series for Disney Plus or something. I don't know the exact thing. And he goes to Natalie Portman and says, "Hey, I think you would, like, I'm doing Star Wars. I think you would be really good as like a character in my show." And she's like, "I've already been in Star Wars." And he, like, no joking, says, "When?"
She was kind of an important character too.
Yeah. I mean, all of her, if you think about it, man, all of her roles in like big genre comic book or, you know, science fiction movies she's essentially been furniture in all of them. Like, she is in Star Wars, she's in 3 movies, she does nothing. Yeah. You know, she's in Thor movies, she does nothing. The movies where she has the most
V for Vendetta.
Yeah, but that's a very different film.
That's probably
that's a comic book movie.
Yeah, that's true. That's her best comic book movie role to date still. Of course.
Agreed, but she also did something. So she was probably like, look, have me do something. And they're like, oh, well, there's this plot line we could do, blah, blah, blah. But why they wanted her, other than, again, we have to go back to the possibility of a creative agenda.
Yep.
Other than that, I don't know why you would make this, especially as you put it, because she dies at the end and goes to Valhalla, which means they're doing something with gods eventually. Yeah. That's where that's leading to.
Especially with that end credits scene.
Also, how they got what's his name? The guy who plays Heimdall.
Idris Elba, yeah.
Idris Elba, yeah. How they got him back for that? Good, congratulations. Because I remember when he was doing Endgame, he's like, I am so out. Like, I didn't want to do this anymore. Yeah. Even though he never had that big of a role, he just like hated it. But basically, he was kind of married to it because when he did the first one, he wasn't particularly popular yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, but anyway, whatever.
I mean, any final thoughts on this one, guys? Or
I will say that I have not watched She-Hulk. I have not watched Moon Knight. I don't even know if there's been another MCU movie after this one that's already come out, to be totally honest. And I've been like the biggest, I mean, I've been a proponent of MCU is awesome. I love it. I want to talk about its lore, this, that, and the other. And this phase of it, phase 4 with everything, I'm kind of getting there with a whole bunch of people who are just like, I don't care about this anymore.
I think it's a mix of fatigue and just too much content not stringed properly together.
I think it's more the latter. I don't have burnout from I don't have to do anything. It's 2 hours of my time to theoretically enjoy a story. But when that story doesn't go anywhere, is not interesting of in itself, does not advance a greater tapestry of anything that's interesting to me, why am I watching it? And unfortunately, that's been most of Phase 4 aside from Spider-Man. There hasn't been much in there. In fact, some of the worst, if not the worst films of the MCU have all existed in this phase. I like the show concept, but I think we talked about this when we talked about all that Star Wars stuff, like Obi-Wan and everything. You're just taking a movie and stretching it out onto like 6 or 7 episodes and just padding and padding and padding. And it's like, just feels like you're wasting my time. And that's how all of Phase 4, except for Spider-Man, feels. In the Phase 4, there hasn't been anyone guiding that ship in particular. There's been no super fan says, this is where it has to go. Yes, too many cooks in the kitchen of individual films, and then they kind of loosely string it together. There is actually, I forget her name, there is now a woman in charge of all of this tapestry stuff for Phase 4. And I'm going to be honest, she's not doing a good job. She doesn't seem to have this going anywhere. Every single one of these movies we come out of it, we're completely speculating about whether or not where this is going. Like, we're like, I don't know, maybe they're going into gods now. The last one, they're like, maybe they're going into celestial beings. Oh, maybe now they're going into interdimensional stuff. We don't even know, because that's like 3 different potential supervillains that you could have gone in any one phase. They put all 3 of them in the same phase, and it doesn't. What is that? Like, where do you even go after that? And that's the whole point.
Yeah, they have written themselves into a really crappy corner at the point, and now they got to get out of it somehow. Or at this point, does it really matter? Everyone's just going to show up to see the MCU anyways, right?
Yeah, I mean, I can't even argue with the success for all the people such as myself who are like, I'm starting to get tired of this. Like I said at the beginning of this movie grossed $755 million worldwide.
Yep, it's a force to be reckoned with.
Yeah, I mean,
that it is.
Just to wrap up my final thought, it's like, to your point, I do see how Phase 4 is seeming to be, kind of, a wet fart kind of thing. But I don't know. To me, like, I was getting some franchise fatigue by like the end of Phase 2, and the amount of shows and content and interwoven, like, you have movies and TV shows taking place at different times. Like, it's impossible to keep straight now. And, like, I don't necessarily see a dip in the quality of these movies. I just see them as the same fucking movie over and over again that I've said multiple times. It's just all so samey to me. And that when there's something that, is exciting, it's for, like, a brief second, like something like WandaVision. I even thought Spider-Man, honestly, it's like, if you didn't have the built-in nostalgia of Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire, I don't think that movie would have been that good. I don't know. I just see myself watching less and less of the MCU product as time goes forward. This is the first movie I've seen since Spider-Man. I don't know. I'm pretty bored.
So I'm going to leave it with this. I think that Marvel Phase 4 accidentally predicted itself at the beginning. You remember at the end of Loki when the timelines are melting and it's just going into 1,000 different directions and they're like, oh my god, chaos? That's where we are with the MCU.
Okay. I absolutely agree with that, and am going to pretty much say as my last thought that, go out and judge for yourself, everybody. You like what you like. You don't like what you like. Just go out and judge for yourself at the end, That's all you got to do. It's your choice at the end what movies you watch, right?
Yep.
Right. So thank you guys very much. Keith, thank you for joining me. Joining us, I should say.
Yep.
Rob, obviously, thanks for you. Joseph, from joining us earlier. Also, shout-outs to Spencer Purrier. Abdullah, hope you get well soon. We got, from Cox and Chuck Shaw, who also picked subject, as well as Luis Bonilla, Loke, Michael Kelly, Tim Inman, and Trey Wagner. Thank you guys very much. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Please like, comment, subscribe. Follow all the social media stuff in the description: Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Discord, Patreon, obviously. Appreciate it. Thank you very much, and we'll see you all later.